Well, good morning. How's everyone this fine, lovely morning? We're here. Trust we're thankful that the Lord has brought us again to this place, brought us together. We might look at, in this case, history, specifically the history of one of the most vilified primitive Baptists in our history, Daniel Parker. We're going to talk today about Parker's political career in Illinois. I'm primarily going to be using Wimberly's dissertation that became his book, Frontier Preacher, The Life of Elder Daniel Parker. I don't know how much change there is in the dissertation to the book. I know there has to be some. There always is. Let me preface this by saying something I think I said earlier in this series, but it bears repeating here. When you have a non-primitive Baptist, or even just a non-Baptist, trying to write our history, many times they make errors, not because they're stupid. Now, sometimes they make errors because they have an agenda that they want to promote. You know, missionary Baptist historians in particular, they have an agenda they want to promote. And part of that agenda is that they, the missionary Baptist, are the true original Baptist. So they're going to do everything they can to vilify, scandalize, whatever, the old school primitive Baptist, to try and prove that. A secular historian can look at things sometimes more objectively than one that has religion. I believe that. However, they are also prone to error because they don't know, for want of a better term, they don't know our ways. So therefore, they're going to look for a psychological or a natural or naturalistic reason for things people do, rather than that they're moved by the Spirit of God, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's the case with Wimberly, particularly in this chapter, in the chapter on Texas, the move to Texas. Parker had printed his public address in 1820. The following 2 years, a lot had transpired, a lot of controversy concerning it. It tore up net-in associations all through that area. He's going to spend 4 years after that, from 1822 to 1826, in the Illinois State Assembly. They got to remember a few things about the political situation and the turmoil of the times. We're used to political parties we're used to big campaigns. 1920, there wasn't really political parties on the local level like there would be a few years later. A man stood or fell on what he believed and what his neighbors and friends and enemies thought of him. They'd put you in office because they liked you and thought you'd do what you say. You had ideas that agreed with theirs, or they'd keep you out for the opposite reason. They didn't like you, they didn't believe you, or you wanted to do things contrary to what they thought was best. So that's what we have here. Excuse me. I don't know what's going on. Thought I got a pretty good night's sleep last night. Illinois, according to Wimberly, was settled mainly by Southerners. Particularly in the southern third of the state, which is where we would find Parker. Remember, Parker was born in Virginia, raised in Georgia, began his ministry in Tennessee. So he's a Southerner. Another one who went to Illinois in about that same time period was that Kentuckian named Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln. There you go. Now, the Southerner that came to Illinois, the reason I say that is why I bring dishonest Abe into it. Man couldn't even tell where he was from. I'm Abe Lincoln of Illinois. No, he may live in Illinois, but he's Abe Lincoln from Kentucky. For years and years when I lived in Maryland, where are you from? Well, I live in Salisbury, Maryland, but I'm from Oklahoma. Same way here, I live in Fairmont, West Virginia, but I'm from Oklahoma. You know, can't get away from that. I can't. Can't get away from it. It's the way it is. That's the way it is. So, anyway, these Southerners that came were Southerners looking not to maintain the aristocracy, but rather they were coming to try to gain something that they couldn't get in the South. Land, maybe a status, because Lord knows that, you had classes back then, just kind of like you got classes now. Didn't have the money to buy slaves if they did want them. So you bought land and you had a family. And that's how you worked that land. You weren't involved with the so-called elites. So, now, it's going to tell us something about Parker. Because though Parker was a Southerner by birth, raised in the South, began his ministry in the South, fought wars with Methodists and Campbellites in the South. You know, but he was opposed to slavery. And Wimberly makes a point in his book that a lot of the Southerners that came to Illinois were opposed to slavery. Of course, a lot of them just didn't want the blacks up there. Others of them on moral grounds. We already saw Parker's opposition to slavery in the public address. Remember that section? You know, let the planter and his come down from his mansion and wash the feet of the Negro slave that made the profession of faith. There you go. All right. So Parker was in the southern Illinois, as we said earlier, Crawford County, which was the most populous county in the state at the time he came there. Palestine was the county seat. I assume they pronounced it Palestine. Just an aside, folks, if you go to Texas, it's Palestine, not Palestine. There's an old-time music festival down there that if a person likes that kind of music, it's well worth your attending in the spring. Anyway, so that's where Parker was. Now, remember Parker became pastor of the Grand Prairie Church and preached at Lamont and Little Village. He was evidently quite a popular preacher. There were, in the year 1822, late 1822 to 1823, were 47 received into that church by baptism. Became a growing church of 70 members. Wimberly, again, kind of misses the point, I think, because he doesn't know that much about the Baptist and the Old Baptist in particular. He said the reason they gained these converts was because Parker was popular as a preacher. I believe if they came to them and asked for baptism, said, well, why do you want to be baptized? Man, we dig your pastor's preaching. I would hope a red flag would go up in the minds of the congregation. And they would say, why? Why do you like it? I don't know. Why don't you wait till you know and come back to us then? Now, these 47 who were baptized had to confess that Jesus was the Christ, that they trusted in him solely as their Savior. They didn't come saying, oh, Parker wasn't up there saying, I'll give your heart to Jesus. Surrender your life. No. We're looking for people that Jesus had brought them in and set them down. There's an instance in the book of Ezekiel where God takes him by the hair of the head and sets him down where he'd have him be. You one of them hair of the head Baptists? What do you mean by that? I mean that if God wants you in the Baptist church, he'll pick you up by the hair of the head and set you down in it at his time and at his pleasure. And you'll be there if that's what's necessary. That'd be pretty bad if you bald-headed, wouldn't it? Again, Wimberly equates popularity, the fact that Parker was preaching at the three Baptist churches there in the county, what's believed to be the three Baptist churches, what he believed. He didn't think there were any more. There probably wasn't. All one has to do is look at associational records and one could see. And he makes the assumption that Parker was broadcasting political rhetoric from the pulpit. Now, over the years, and I guess you can say maybe I learned this from Elder Poole. I like to think I learned it elsewhere, but came into it through him. Pulpit's not the place for political rhetoric. You with me? I may mention something political in passing. But I hope I never will ever present a political discourse to you in the name of the Old Baptist Church at Welsh Tract or any other. Now, after meeting down there in the basement or wherever we were eating lunch, now that's another story. Might talk a little politics, but not there. I may have mentioned to you that on the Eastern Shore, my goodness, you had the Salisbury Association. Let's just consider the churches in Maryland at one time. And we're talking in the 20s, 30s. Had Dividing Creek, Fishing Creek, Snow Hill, Salisbury, Indiantown, Rewastico, Nassiongo, Dividing Creek, Fishing Creek, Salisbury, Nassiongo, Indiantown, Snow Hill, Forest Grove, Rewastico. There were 8 churches in that association in Maryland. There were others in Delaware. one in Virginia. What I'm getting at here is during election years, the politicians, I'm sure they did this in North Carolina too, because that's even bigger. But the politicians would come to the associations and politic after the services, during lunchtime, during break time. Because they said on the Eastern Shore, the old Baptist vote could swing the election. Somebody could get behind. And part of that is because just because the church has membership of 70, like the Lamont Church had after its increase, doesn't mean that's all the attenders there were. Why no? Particularly in the days of once a month churches. When I first met Elder Poole there in Dallas, and we started corresponding, he told me, and when I observed it for myself when I went down there. There may have been, at that time, 3 of those were gone, so there have been 5 churches in Maryland and 1 in Delaware that were left in the Salisbury Association. It was more like one congregation meeting in 6 different meeting houses than it was 6 different churches. It's the same way back then. Anytime you got once a month church, twice a month church, where you don't meet every Sunday, you're going to have visitors from other churches, and you're going to get people from the community who aren't members showing up. We all know that. We've seen it. When I attended Black Rock Church, I'm guilty. Smack me. There was no church at Black Rock. That's what I was getting ready to say. When I attended the meeting at Black Rock, the last member had died in the 70s, 60s, maybe. Long time. But Elder Wood continued to go there because there was interest in the community. And we had a congregation of 10, 15. Some were members at Welsh Tract. Some were not members at all. Some had been among the old Baptists all their life. Some had just started going. It's just hard to say. So everybody showed up. So Wimberly rightly sees that part. And like I say, this is even into my lifetime, and particularly in the generation before me, they saw it. I'll never forget going to the Upper Country Line Association in 77. So big it had to be held at school because church building, the church that was hosting the association couldn't hold all the people. They had in a school auditorium. My. I'm sure if that had been election year, we'd have seen people around there working the crowd. Glad-handed, telling them what they could do for them. Well, in 1822, Parker gets his first political appointment. Parker and another Baptist named William Ryan were appointed overseers of the poor in the Palestine Township. And his second appointment, he was a maintenance supervisor for certain county roads. There you go. Now, had those local offices, but he ran for the Senate from Crawford and Clark County to the Third General Assembly, also in 1822. Parker had no political experience. Lord, I gotta say it. I got to. It's gonna bust if I don't. I'm gonna bust if I don't say it. Which would make him today an ideal candidate for office. He is not entrenched in the bureaucratic system. So he's an outsider, so to speak. And in he goes. Because he was uneducated, was no bar to politics. Can you imagine today a political party, even the off parties like, the Green Party? By off, I mean the non-mainstream small parties. I'm not disparaging them. Everybody got to start somewhere, and sometimes they run pretty good. I'll tell you what, I've voted Libertarian several times. But anyway, we got the Mountain Party and the Constitution Party and all these things. Even if they would put up someone who made the statement, well, I've never looked at an English grammar for 5 minutes, don't understand any rules in arithmetic, how they would be laughed at by not just the media, but by the voting public once they found out. Back then, it didn't matter because a lot of your voters was in the same boat you were, raised on the frontier, didn't have opportunity for education. If they had any, they got it themselves. And Wimberly mentions there was at least one illiterate person in the assembly who was voted state senator 6 times. One almost illiterate. Now here we go. Look at this. I'm going to read this quote. I'm going to read this, quote it. And this is where he messes up, in my opinion. Fortunately for Parker, his rousing pulpit oratory, rather than a lack of experience, appealed to the electorate. Now, there may have been some members of the churches that he was serving who would vote for him because of that he was their pastor, and that was the only reason. I'm going to tell you what. I do not believe the electorate back then was as shallow as he makes them out to be. A rousing pulpit oratory isn't what made people, one, join the church, two, support Parker for legislative office. And he mentioned some preachers. Thomas Young, Baptist, New Light, David McGahey, William Kinney, Baptist, Samuel Thompson, Methodist. A Methodist pioneer, preacher, and evangelist Peter Cartwright. He won 2 terms for the state representative. And he has the distinction, Peter Cartwright, of being the man whom Abraham Lincoln defeated in the race for the House of Representatives in 1846. We kept it up. By 1846, Parker's already in Texas. It's been there several years. Guess what one of the main concerns was in the 1820s, particularly the early 1820s? No, it wasn't slavery. It was the economy. So I hated most of what he did. Bill Clinton was right on one thing. It's the economy, stupid. So, had fallen prices, borrowers that couldn't repay the debts because they made them at a time when the interest was high. So that's kind of the backdrop. Of Parker's run for the legislature. The what's the word I'm looking for, brethren? The government was trying to stimulate the economy, particularly in the West, by lowering the price of land. Public land went from $2 an acre to $1.25 an acre. If you'd bought 500 acres and couldn't pay for it, if you'd paid enough to get 200 of those acres, you give 300 back to the government and your debt's clear. They'd sell it again. There you go. Banks were at the forefront of this as well. So the main things, here's the main points he says was in the 1822 election. The state bank, public lands, internal improvements, and slavery. See, the state banks had done what a good fractional reserve banking system should do. They put out a lot more money than they had capital for. See, back then, banknotes were money. Used to be you could buy some notes issued by state banks during this time period pretty cheaply. People didn't want them. Collectors, that is. Be interested to have gotten more than what I wound up with. But they issued all these banknotes, but they didn't have funds to back up. And what happened? What happened when the bank went under? How much was that money worth then? Zero. All right. So, Mr. Parker, Elder Parker, entered into the lists, as it were, on those principles. Oh, one of the public works things they had going back then was the Illinois-Michigan Canal. You're going to build them a canal so they wouldn't be hampered by low water in the rivers to get goods to market and bring goods in for sale. Why was slavery an issue? Illinois wasn't known as a slave state. Well, one of the things I didn't know till I read Wimberley's book is that there was huge salt works in Illinois, right across the river from Kentucky. And the Illinois Constitution permitted the leasing of slaves. Kentucky was a slave state. So they leased slaves to work the salt. Between 1,000 and 2,000 to work at those salt wells. So then, oh, and think about this. Missouri, right next to them, was going to be a slave state. Well, guess where people had to travel to get there? Through Illinois, a lot of them. They were seeing all these. So, there's Elder Parker. Running for the state senate. All these things. All these things bearing on that campaign. Excuse me one moment. Get out. Oh. So, what you got? Got a bunch of people running for Senate. Edward Cullum, politician, civic leader. He and his associates were Joseph and Wycliffe Ketchel, Cullum and Joseph Ketchel had represented the county in the Constitutional Convention and territorial government. They didn't oppose slavery. They also donated much of the land that Palestine sits on. The Ketchels came from New Jersey, then to Ohio, then to Indiana, before going to Illinois. Land speculators. And Joseph is a judge at the circuit court in Indiana. Wycliffe was the sheriff of the same county. Think there might have been a little collusion there. Much later in county I worked in here in West Virginia, this one lawyer get himself appointed a commissioner to sell somebody's land that was delinquent in taxes, or wouldn't be delinquent in taxes, but for debt or something like that. And lo and behold, his brother would buy it. So, there you got Cullum. It says Cullum discovered that the political novice Parker presented a serious challenge. By mid-June, the Baptist minister already had concluded a 2 to 3 week electioneering tour. On Election Day, 5th of August, 1822, Palestine echoed political rhetoric. At 8 a.m., Thomas Brown had mounted the stump within earshot of the poll. Brown, a pro-Edwards candidate, accomplished little in Crawford County. Voters favored him with a mere 37 ballots. Phillips, that's one, 122. Coles, 69. Now, in the Senate contest, that was the governorship, excuse me. In the Senate contest, out of 364 votes in Crawford and Clark counties, Parker garnered 134 to 104 for Cullum. And in Crawford County alone, 113 to 83. Beat him by half again. He served in the Senate from 1822 to 1826. He was a populist. Fiscally, he was a conservative. Here's how fiscally conservative he was. pat the old boy on the back for this too. Although inflation had reduced the real value of the $2 a day per diem allotted to assemblymen, he voted against pay increases for legislatures. Now, here's how kind Parker was. To those who he would have no Christian fellowship with. Have they maintained the roads back then? Well, mostly through what we saw earlier, county road commissioners. Courts would appoint supervisors, and they'd call on citizens for labor or money. Parker was sympathetic to the Quaker and the Dunkers, or the Dunkards. He introduced a resolution which exempted pacifist Quakers and Dunkers from hiring substitutes for the militia. In other words, before Parker's resolution, if you wanted out of serving in the local militia, you had to hire a substitute, even if you were a pacifist. And by a pacifist, I don't mean just somebody saying, well, I'm a pacifist. I mean, look today, you got the Mennonites, the Amish, well, most Mennonites. Some Mennonites don't believe nothing. But you have Mennonites still that stand in the Anabaptist tradition of non-resistance. They're real pacifists. Amish, same way. Hutterites. They have a history of it. Dunkards, the early Dunkards particularly. I don't know about the modern Dunkards. Parker also looked to maintain internal improvements, debt release, and the shortage of money. He introduced or supported construction bills for at least 4 roads, favored the improvements of navigation, and the Lake Michigan, Illinois River Canal. You get my vote just for what's coming next. He supported the reduction of taxes on town lots and relief for debtors who resided on public lands. So, that's where Parker stood. Now, Wimberly calls this mundane, this next thing. He also moved that the stationery committee provide each desk in the Senate chamber with an inkstand, a lock and key, 6 candlesticks, and 6 copies of the statute laws. It's not mundane. That's what you needed to carry on business, isn't it? So, here we go. He seems to have exhibited a genuine interest in the public good and his constituency. There you go. a genuine interest, not a feigned interest, but genuine interest. I would expect no less from him. So, according to this, his foremost contribution is his struggle against slavery. Governor, in his address to the Assembly, his inaugural address to the joint session, called for the abrogation of slavery in the state and was a bitter struggle. So, what are they going to do? Said we can't legislate it. It's got to be a constitutional amendment. To do that, we got to have a constitutional convention. Only a referendum could authorize the calling of the convention. Pro-slavery advocates wanted it because they thought they'd get it run through. The opposite of what the others wanted. So he entered the struggle. According to Wimberly, again, I think this is where he misses the boat on Parker. Although Parker had published little about slavery, he entered the struggle against human bondage. The opposition of Parker grew out of concerns about class, economics, and his political constituency. He stood to gain politically by taking an anti-slavery stance. Although a religious minority in Crawford County, the Quaker inhabitants resisted slavery as a moral evil. A broader opposition came from the non-slaveholding yeomen who composed the great majority of his constituency. Out of 683 households in Crawford and Clark counties, only 11 possessed slaves. Beset by hard times, yeomen looked askance at possible attempts to legalize slavery. If large planters immigrated with their slaves to southeastern Illinois, hard-pressed farmers and mechanics would have difficulty competing against slave labor. And then he quotes what I quoted to you on the public address about that. Wimberly then talks about the Friends for Humanity. The Baptist Church Friends of Humanity was a breakaway organization of abolitionists. They withdrew from the Illinois Association, formed a separate bunch, and eventually united with the Arminians. Parker had nothing to do with them. In 1824, I'm going to read this the way he wrote it. His Lamont Pastorate condemned slavery in the minutes of the Wabash District Association as contrary to the principles of free government, Christianity, and God. So, all right. Well, They delayed and they delayed because they was trying to get a non-slavery majority in the House, in the Assembly. And the election was coming up, 1824. So they're fighting and fighting and fighting. They use parliamentary tactics to stall things. So they couldn't get the majority that they needed. Had to have a 60%, I believe, back then. So they played dirty politics back then, just like they play today. It doesn't matter when it is. Human nature hasn't changed, and politics hasn't changed. There were 5 newspapers in Illinois. 4 of them supported slavery. 1 of them was against it. Senators several of them, 5 senators, 10 representatives, gathered and said, we're going to go to the one paper that'll go for this and start an anti-slavery campaign. Parker contributed $50 to defray the expense of printing it. His contribution drew public criticism. Oh, yeah, this is good. In the following June, a pro-slavery lobbyist published a lobbyist. Oh, my Lord, they had them back then? Yes, they did. That vermin has been around as long as ticks and lice have. At this meeting, Parker contributed $50 to display. We're down here. The following June, a pro-slavery lobbyist published a letter to Parker in the Illinois Intelligencer. The lobbyist, familiar with the conviction which Parker held toward salaried preachers, badgered the Crawford County senator. He accused Parker of using public funds, meaning the $7 per diem then allotted to each assemblyman, for bribing a printer to publish anti-convention material. For 2 years, February 1823, August 1824, Constitutional Convention divided communities and families. It stirred such controversy that the possibility of civil war ensued. If things would stay like that, we might be talking about bloody Illinois instead of bloody Missouri during the war between the states, huh? So, there you go. Parker found common ground with one of his nemesis, J.M. Peck, on the issue of slavery in the Constitutional Convention. Peck distributed anti-slavery literature. So there you go. Record number of ballots cast. They're voting on a convention, constitutional convention, and the ballots for that 1824 election exceeded the ballots cast in the 1824 election or 1822 election for governor, representative, senator by 3,006. Amazing, isn't it? The aged and the crippled were carried to the polls. Men voted on this occasion that had not seen the ballot box in 20 years. Voters rejected the convention by a 1,668 vote majority. How about that? Isn't that great? All right. The last official act of Senator Daniel Parker was to dismiss in 1826 the Fourth Assembly of the Senate with prayer. And this ended his political career. Ended it. He didn't cease from wanting to get back into politics. A lot of the members of his churches, and other Baptists at that time were getting into it and gathering, getting in there. In 1826, Wycliffe Kitchell challenged Parker for his Senate seat. On 8th of January, 1825, Kitchell baited the Crawford County senator with a request for an explanation regarding some alleged remarks by Parker. Kitchell maligned Parker for lacking the moral qualifications for office. He demanded that Parker respond to allegations of counterfeiting, spinning tales about a treasure hunt in Tennessee, and demagoguery. Kitchell timed his letter to correspond with the adjournment of the first session of the Fourth Assembly on 18 January 1825. There you go. Parker said what? They're unworthy. These allegations are unworthy of notice. Then old Daniel figured out that Kitchell fella had political ambitions. Kitchell threatened Parker. He's going to address him through the newspapers. Well, he didn't say that. Another medium. So, if not squelched, these allegations might imperil the reelection of Parker. So, lawyer Kitchell had carefully selected his accusations on the hearsay of Joseph Kitchell and Thomas Kennedy. Now, part of the reason that counterfeiting thing was brought up was because anybody who circulated counterfeit money in the state of Illinois was ineligible for public office, period. Parker allegedly had complained to Joseph Kitchell that Cullum and James Shaw, political enemies of Parker, had leveled charges of counterfeiting at the preacher senator. Allegations of counterfeiting evidently had circulated throughout the community previous to the 1824 Assembly election and convention referendum. By April 1824, these rumors had attracted so much attention that Parker sought the aid of the Lamont congregation. At the request of Parker, the church appointed a committee of 7 to investigate the matter. On 7 August, 5 days after the convention election, the committee exonerated Parker at its monthly church conference. Kitchell related that Parker had boasted about a dubious treasure exposition. According to Daniel Parker, he and his brother Joseph had returned to Tennessee in order to search for Spanish gold. Wycliffe challenged Senator Parker to verify the story with details. Unless Parker could justify the money hunting excursion, such a venture might support charges concerning the importation and circulation of bogus money. If proven false, the story cast Parker as an irresponsible tale-teller unworthy of public trust. Joseph Kitchell had received the third accusation from Thomas Kennedy. Kennedy reported that prior to the 1822 election, Parker had trumpeted a presumed God-ordained call to serve in the assembly. Here's another piece of speculation from Wimberly. Although Parker later denied this charge, it is possible that he inserted religious issues into the campaign. David McGahey, an 1822 candidate for the Illinois House of Representatives, in Cullum belonged to religious groups which espoused Arminianism. In the mind of Parker, the mission system had been an offspring of Arminianism. No, not in the mind of Parker. In reality, the mission system was the offspring of Arminianism. Moreover, some viewed 19th century manifestation of progress, listen now, progress, such as banks and corporations, as well as missionary and benevolent societies, as departures from the purity of Republican tradition. We ain't talking about the Republican Party, we're talking about a Republican as in standing for the American Republic. Wycliffe attacked the alleged God-ordained clamor of Parker as demagoguery. By raising this issue, Wycliffe meant to impugn Parker as a power-obsessed official. Well, there you go. That's what he was accused of. Parker answered in a letter written 15 February 1825. Parker verified the circumstances of the treasure hunting expedition. Although he did not offer a specific refutation of demagoguery and counterfeiting, Parker summarily dismissed all of the allegations as false. Moreover, he attacked Wycliffe Kitchell for purposely engendering strife in order to reap personal political gain. In a riddle-like narrative, Parker chided Kitchell for his undeserved criticism. 5 days later, Kitchell fired back with an insulting 5-page epistolary. He hurled charges of apostasy and tyranny against Parker. With more personal barbs, Kitchell referred to the disordered mind of Parker and also insinuated possible sexual improprieties. In addition, the lawyer accused the preacher politician of crying persecution in order to distract attention from an unquenchable desire for worldly riches. Now, he sued him. Parker sued Kitchell over that last part. Had to withdraw the suit because his witness failed to appear, whereupon the court required Parker to pay the cost of Kitchell's defense. He earned a second suit against him for $12,000. Trial took a week. The jury declared Kitchell not guilty, and according to Wimberly, this foreshadowed his political decline. The 1826 race was won by William B. Archer. Lived about a mile from Parker, from a mill operated by Parker. He was another champion of the anti-slavery cause, and they elected him in 1824 to the House of Representatives. So there it is. Now, there was new counties being made in Illinois all the time. Parker ran. He lost big time. Big time. All right. So that's some of his career, some of the dirty politics that was played against him. Tried to work the system against the person that. Here's another thing that Wimberly says that I think is wrong. By 1826, Parker had been involved in rancorous conflicts over church leadership and support of missionary societies. That's true, right? This discord had marked Parker as a contentious and authoritarian leader. I'm not so sure about that. Such a reputation, real or alleged, did not conform to the principles of Jeffersonian republicanism. the lawsuit. He probably should never have done that, humanly speaking. But he did again in 1832 run for the House of Representatives. Got beat. So there you go. National political parties were forming. Whigs, the Democrats, Henry Clay, Andrew Jackson. All right. Again, Wimberly goes in after this and talks about Parker's desire for power. Talks about him playing politics. You know? I don't believe that. I don't believe that about the man. You can't take the man's pulpit actions and his religious convictions and wrap up the political convictions right there with them. You can't do it. It's not right. Wimberly does say that his opposition to slavery was real and formidable. And that he couldn't get with the times. Just like the missionary Baptist said he couldn't get with the times in religion, he says he couldn't get with the times in politics. And in that regard, he's probably right. He's probably right. They're starting to get big political parties, affiliation, and all that. Parker stood aloof from it. He was still a Jeffersonian Democrat Republican. Didn't care for the Whigs, didn't care for the Democrats. Didn't want to participate in the conventions, any of this stuff. He's a populist. Well, just because Parker got defeated in Illinois didn't mean that was the end of his political aspirations. Once we get him down to Texas, we'll see that he tries again down there and succeeds. But we have something to consider beforehand. Pardon me. Before we get him to Texas, we have to look at what he is most known for: the doctrine of the two seeds. We're going to look at the good points of the doctrine that he presented. We're going to look at the bad points. I want you to remember one thing during that discussion, and I'll remind you about that again Friday, Lord willing. Despite the fact that we believe there are errors in Parker's two-seed system, his contemporaries, Thompson, Beebe, and Trott, did not cease to call him brother. They did not say that he was a reprobate. They opposed what they thought was wrong with it, but they had respect for the man. Unlike most people who vilify his name today. So we're going to talk about the doctrine of the two seeds. We'll mention some things from his original book, The Views of the Two Seeds. Some things that he brought out again in second dose of the doctrine of the two seeds, dealt out in broken doses. And then we don't have a copy of his third dose of the two seeds. I have not been able to find one anywhere at all. If the Lord would bless me to, I'd love to go to southern Indiana, southern Illinois, where Parker's ministry was. Oh, mouse, get down. At the time he wrote those books, and see if I could actually find one down there. Because that would be his most mature views, I think. I may be wrong there in the article in the volume 2 of the Church's Advocate might be the most mature version of it. Anyway, third dose of the doctrine of the two seeds. How do I even know it exists? Elder Trott talked about it. Parker himself talked about it. Because when we get him to Texas, I'm going to read some things he wrote to a paper called the Western Predestinarian Baptist at that time, right before his death. So stay tuned. If you're enjoying this, I know today's probably pretty boring because it deals strictly with politics. I don't know about y'all, but I get sick of politics. I got sick of reading that chapter the first time I read it, but I hung with it because I felt like I had to. The more I learn about Elder Parker, the more I admire him. I still like Elder Parker. Yes, brethren. Yes, brethren. There are some good things about Elder Parker. I don't care what the missionaries or anybody else says about him. There are some good things. I am absolutely convinced of that. And I am absolutely convinced as I'm sitting here talking to you right now. And if anybody would ever read, particularly the Doctrine of the Two Seeds, or excuse me, my views on the two seeds, his first book on the subject. No one would need to tell you he didn't have a week of schooling. No one would need to tell you he'd never examined the English grammar 5 minutes. Though there are some places of it that soar in eloquence, it's there. It's there. And I am fully convinced, as much as I'm sitting here talking to y'all, that Elder Parker saw more of the truth than his natural mind could express. Therefore, he come up with some things that we look at askance because we think they're wrong, and rightly so, in my opinion. Um, he saw more than his natural mind could express. I believe that. They called Jesus Beelzebub, so you can imagine what they think of the rest of us after Parker. Brother, I'm going to give you an example here from more modern times. When I first got a hold of Elder Smoot's book, The Contest, when I first got a hold of that book, by the way, it was a gift from Elder W.J. Barry. I went over. I was living there. I moved to Salisbury, and well, shoot, only a couple of hours over there to Occoquan, Virginia. A little more than that. I left home about 5 o'clock in the morning to beat the rush hour traffic around D.C. Scoped the place out. Made several visits over there and talked to people who had known Elder Smoot. The Quantico Church was at a place called Independent Hill. And at the time I went there, the only thing that said Independent Hill was a sign on the road and a store, gas station. Now, the folks in that gas station and store were a little older than me. But you got to remember, Elder Smoot died in, I think, 1936. And I don't believe either person that was in there was old enough to have ever heard him. And they hated him. And they delighted in telling things on him that may or may not have been true, probably weren't, but were set to paint him in a bad light. So, yeah. I remember it was told a friend of mine one time, listen, he had got up in the stand. This when we were both with the Conditional Primitive Baptist, and he says, I believe in the absolute predestination of all things, but not like the absoluters. Old deacon in the church went up to him after the service and said, brother, have you ever heard an absoluter preach? He said, no, I haven't. Looked at him and said, well, if you want to know what a primitive Baptist believe, just go ask the local missionary Baptist preacher that's never heard one, and he'll tell you. And he invited him to go to the South Arkansas Association the next week or the week after, I can't remember which. The Absolute South Arkansas Association. That's the beginning of the end for us. I guess. It's what brought us here. So, like I say, this was my least favorite one to prepare for on the Parker thing because of the fact it dealt strictly with politics. Next week, we'll get into the doctrinal issues. And I will mention this just in passing. We'll mention it again next week. It'll go in a little more fully. Wimberly is of the opinion that Parker published the doctrine of the two seeds in order to revive his sluggish political career. I don't believe a word of it. I believe he published the doctrine of the two seeds because he believed it, because he thought people ought to have it. So there. Well, all right. Questions, comments? We've been at this thing far too long this morning. Are all minds clear? Bow with me. Heavenly Father, we pray that Thou would take the things of Jesus Christ and show them unto us, that Thou would cause us to love the history of our people, the history of Thy working in Thy people. We know that nothing transpires without Thy hand, and nothing can befall us without Thy goodness and Thy mercy being upon us, if we are what we hope and profess to be. Keep us safe, we pray. Keep us in the way everlasting. Give us peace for the days as we have them on this earth. Gather us together again. Enable us to look into Thy word, see Jesus. Above all, see Jesus. In whose name we pray. Amen. Monday, 8 a.m. in the book of Galatians. Wednesday, same. Thursday, Tuesday, 9 a.m. to the book of Ezekiel we shall go. Please join us if you can. You know, we look at these things, we rejoice in them. We hope that the brethren might glean a little something out of them by the grace of God and by His power. Don't look at this as being mine, as being yours. Look at me as your servant for Christ's sake. If you get anything out of it, matter natural, spiritual, whatever, thank Him that gave it. All right. All minds are clear. I'm going to sign off. May the Lord bless you and keep you. It's my fervent prayer.